This unaired interview was recorded in 2022 with Matt Haynes. This was my first interview on Zoom. Would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Yeah. So my name's Matt Haynes. I teach at Tri-vally Central School. I've been there for 12 years now, and I teach eighth grade English. And I also teach public speaking for seniors as college credit, and then also a civics and social justice elective for juniors and seniors.
Nice. Now, the reason why I invited you, Matt, to this particular interview, I've been hearing from different people, and then I saw recently in the paper that you do slam poetry.
Mhm.
Now, how did you get into that?
So, sort of funny story. Way back when I first started my career, I did a long-term sub position. This was back, before I moved to Sullivan County, and the particular school I was doing it at, they were doing a poetry slam. I'd never heard of it before, didn't know what it was, didn't know anything about it. And when I watched it on stage, I was amazed. And I was completely amazed to see the kids get up there, the poise, the theatrics, all of that. So I took over for about halfway through the year. And then the following year, I got my first job, my own classroom, and I decided something I really want to do. So I saw it performed with 10th graders. That's what I was doing a long-term sub job at. And my first job was at Charlotte Valley Central School. I worked there for 4 years, and I had seventh, eighth, and ninth graders. And I decided I thought eighth grade was the right spot for it. So I started small. And when I came to Tri-vally, I brought it to Tri-vally, and it's grown every single year. Well, now it's a huge event, I think, for the entire school every year.
Why did you think eighth grade was the best for slam poetry?
Yeah, so I've had experience teaching just about all the grades, 7 through 12. And I think eighth grade is a huge year for maturity. I think kids really start to come into their own at that age. And so I thought this was a good year, sort of I could, at the time I was doing seventh, eighth, and ninth, so I could kind of start getting them ready, talk to them about seventh grade, and then really have them perform in eighth grade. And when I came to Tri-vally, I only did eighth grade, so I continued at that grade, and it's just become the eighth grade poetry slam now. We just had our 12th one.
So from the first time you started in Tri-vally, you had this poetry slam going with your eighth graders?
Yes. Yeah.
And prior to that, you said you were doing it where you were in charge of it, maybe a year or two at a different school, or?
Yeah, I was at 4 years. I was at a school, Charlotte Valley Central School. It's just outside of Oneonta. It's a real small school. So I worked there for 4 years before coming to Tri-vally.
So you completely and totally fell in love with poetry slams from the very first that you saw it?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yep.
so I could basically say you've been doing this with students or other people for about 16 years then?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay,
Yep.
now what was it with poetry slams that, made you fall in love with it?
I think watching, one thing we do before we get to the kids performing, it's a whole setup. We start with sort of analyzing poetry, and then we move from analyzing poetry to writing poetry, and then we move to the performance aspect. And in between then, I don't know if you've ever saw the videos, it was an old HBO series, Def Jam Poetry. So really, really cool. Yeah, so I bought all the seasons of it, and I watched them. I was obsessed there for a while. And one of my personal heroes is Taylor Molly, who performed on there a few times. He was national champion a couple of times. I got to see him perform live a few times. So he was a huge inspiration for me getting into teaching to begin with, but then also watching his poetry performance were really inspiring to me. And I just think I like poetry in general, but I think poetry has there's so much more to it, so much more power to it to see someone actually perform it. Not just read it, but to actually get up there on stage and put on performance. To me, there's so much power to that. And to see my kids, I start off beginning of every single year saying, all right, how many of you, I tell them, here's what the poetry slam is going to be. How many of you are telling me there's a 0% chance that you'll be up there on stage? And almost every kid will raise their hand and it's like, there's no way I'm going to do that. But when we get to the unit, it's building confidence, it's practicing, it's having, older kids come in who have been through it and talking to them. And to see, this year I had probably 85% of the entire grade up there on stage. It just gets to be really inspiring.
So I take it you all do this in the auditorium then. So it's like when you said the whole school is into it.
Yeah. The assignment is the kids have to write their own original poem. They have to memorize it. They can use cue cards, but it has to be mostly memorized, and then they have to perform it. So every kid has to do it in their class for a grade. So I then make the actual poetry slam optional. So they can decide to do it or they can decide not to do it. I give them some incentives, I give them extra credit. We have a couple practice days in the theater, so they get to participate in that. When I first started it at Tri-vally, we did it during the school day. So we did it over a couple periods, but it was really hard for parents. They started reaching out saying, we'd really like to make the event, but it's hard during the day, we're working. So myself and a special education teacher I've worked with for many years now, Deb Sweat, we sort of tried to think outside the box and how could we make it into a nighttime event. So for the past, with the exception of last year, obviously the pandemic, for the past probably 5 years, we've now made it a nighttime event. So what we do is we hold kids after school so they don't have to go home. It's hard for kids to get home and come back to school. So we hold them after school. We do some extra practice time in the theater, and then we actually serve them dinner. So we have our local BOCES, one of our local BOCES instructors, culinary instructor, cooks dinner for us. We have Mike Schulte Memorial Fund pays for the dinner for the kids. So, and then after we have the dinner, then the kids go back to the theater and perform it at night. And, the crowd is with parents, teachers, administrators. A lot of old students come, not because they, are there to make fun of the kids or anything. They've been through it, so they want to be there. So now it's become, a pretty big event every single year.
But to me, I think when you put people on a stage who have a message or a point that they want to get across or express their feelings or their experience, it can be rather powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And every year it's interesting to see the topics of the poems. Some years we have a lot more serious topics. Some years we kind of have a lot more topics that are funny or humorous. This year, I think, was a blend between the two. Of course, there's a lot of stuff related to the pandemic. It's what we're all living through. We had a lot of other very serious, very heartfelt topics. And then we had some that were just light and kind of funny. And I really like that. I like the blend of everything.
Exactly.
But I don't give the kids any restrictions, as far as what they can write about, besides saying it has to be appropriate for a school audience. And it has to be something you make sure you're comfortable sharing with a large audience, because that's what's going to be here. And then they write whatever they want, pretty much.
Okay. Can you explain what is a poetry slam for people that don't know what a poetry slam is?
Yeah, so a poetry slam is a performance. So it's not just getting up on stage and reading a poem. It's actually performing through the use of body language, tone, volume, pace, all that. And there are judges who come and will score each poem for us. And then at the end, we announce the winners. So we scored electronically and then announce the winners. I've set up a little off track, but I've set up as far as my poetry slam goes, I choose performance winners every year. And those are kids I just pick on my own, kids I think I've worked very, very hard.
My biggest thank you goes to my 8th grade students. 8th graders, this year has been different than any of us could have ever imagined. This poetry slam this year has been different than any year before, but despite our circumstances.
We also announced the 3rd place, the 2nd place, and the champion for next year's event. So they'll be the people introducing everyone, doing a little speech at the beginning. So that's always a kind of a little carrot. And then 2nd or 1st, then I ask you to come back and judge next year's events. And the first, whoever finishes for the champion for the year, actually can judge for as long as they possibly can come back to the school. So it was kind of cool this year. It was the first year that the event was totally student done, either current student or past students. We had no adults in it at all, besides a speech I gave and besides a guest poet. And we actually had all student judges, including the very first 2 poetry slams at Tri-vally. The first 2 champions were able to come back to the school and judge. It was really cool.
Nice. So this is talking like students from 10 years ago or 12 years ago.
12 and 11 years ago. Yeah, they came back to judge. Yeah.
Oh, very good. Now, are any of them still doing the poetry? Do you, like some of your past students, you find out, do they still continue with poetry? Do they go to any other events, or do any slam experiences?
So, I hear, I don't know about all of them. I know some kids still do some writing. We recently had, I think a couple of weeks ago at Bethel Woods, there's a poetry event put on by our county poet laureate. And we had, I think about, I think 6 or so of our kids from the school come and perform in that as well, which was kind of nice to see. So I always have the older kids ask me, can we come back? Can we participate in a poetry slam, whatever else? And I always keep it to, I said, this is the 8th graders thing here. So this is their time to sort of shine. So I leave it with that.
Do you all ever do it? Do you just have one round in the poetry slam, or do you have several rounds? Do you do it the authentic version of it?
Yeah, we have one round simply for the fact that, well, when I first saw the poetry slam performed at school way back, they had only a select amount of kids who were voted in to perform. So I didn't really want to do that. I honestly wanted every kid who wanted to be able to perform. So we'll sometimes have 50 poems. And as you can imagine, that takes some time. So
Definitely.
they usually take around 2 hours. We try to push them to that. So we just do one round for that simple fact. It gives every kid a chance to get up and perform.
Okay. Do you usually record this?
Yeah, we record them all. I have copies of them all. So this year and 2 years ago, we live streamed them on YouTube as well, so people could watch. And last year, because we couldn't all get together, we actually recorded all the poems, and then we put them all together in a video, and then showed that live as well. So even though we weren't allowed to get together last year, we still had a sort of poetry slam.
Now, have you ever done a poetry slam?
I have not. I used to be when I first brought the Tri-vally, I would always perform something at the end. So I did that for a couple of years, something I wrote. I enjoyed it, but what I found was that trying to get the event organized, all the little pieces getting that, it just became very, very overwhelming for me to try to do a poem too. So now every year I have a special guest poet perform at the end, and I select staff member, administrator, someone that the kids, I think would enjoy performing. So like this year was the guest poet was Bethany Hamilton, who's their seventh grade English teacher. So they got to see her. 2 years ago as our principal, Dave Poley. So every year I bring someone back in who performs, usually for their first time ever on stage, as you can imagine. We had PE teachers and science teachers and social studies teachers. So it becomes kind of fun, every year to pick out who this year's guest poet is going to be.
So when you have your guest poets, are they people that write poetry themselves, or sometimes you're able to get them to do a new poem and it'll be like the first time they've ever written a poem or something like that?
Usually, yeah. Usually we pick out a staff member we think the kids have a connection with, and a lot of them are probably writing their first poem, or certainly the first time performing a poem. So they're doing it for the first time, a lot of them.
How long have you been writing poetry?
I would say on my own, probably close to 15 years. I sort of go through phases where I'll get inspired and write a bunch and then take some time off. So I've done some readings myself. I used to have a poetry reading at our local library, and I would always read something there. So we did that for about a year.
Nice. Now, have you been published at all?
Nope, and I haven't attempted to be either.
Okay. Had you seen the poetry process before you actually started it with your students?
No, the very first time I ever saw any type of poetry slam was with students. It was when I was doing a long-term sub job, and then after that, I just kind of got obsessed with it, and I came across the Def Jam poetry, so into that, watching other videos, and then I went to see some poets live before. I saw Taylor Malley a bunch of times, and said he's definitely one of my inspiration.
Now, Taylor has been here in Sullivan County, hasn't he?
He has. He was in Narrowsburg.
Laura Moran was doing some poetry events at Narrowsburg Library, and I think that he was there.
Yeah, he was definitely. Yeah, I went to see him in Narrowsburg. Yeah, years back.
Yeah, so did I actually. So that's why the name is familiar. And I think that's the first time I was introduced to him, was seeing him in Narrowsburg Library.
He writes a famous poem. It's called "What Teachers Make," and it's like one of my biggest inspirations. I watch it before every single school year starts again.
Now, would you do a poem for us?
If I do a poem for you?
Yes, would you do a poem for us? Okay. Meaning the people that are going to watch this video. That's the for us.
Putting me on the spot here.
Yeah.
Sure. Let me find something here. here. All right, so this is something I wrote for my mom years back. I gave it to her on Mother's Day at a frame. It's called "There's More Than One Way to Start a Fire." My mom is a wonderful woman, without a doubt, one of the most amazing women I've ever known. And I guess it was from my mother that I've picked up so many of my obsessive compulsive behaviors, obsessions that drive others absolutely insane. One thing my mom is not is a pyromaniac. She is simply obsessed with fire. When she is not home or is sleeping, the dryer is not allowed to be running in case, as my mother always reminds me, it gets too hot, it sparks and starts a fire. During the hot 90-degree summers in New York, fans are not allowed to be running if she is not in the house. There is the chance, she always reminds me, that the fan could fall over, the motor could get hot, and it could start a fire. Even the treadmill, the machine I use when feeling ambitious, runs the risk of catching fire, at least according to my mom. How many times have I gone to get on the treadmill to find it unplugged from the wall? It can, as my mother has frequently reminded me, get hot, send an electrical impulse up the cord, and start a fire. Once, when I was a teenager, my mother was snooping through something she shouldn't have been, an invitation I had to a party. She bent over to pick it up when suddenly her hair, full of hairspray, fell into a lit candle. And as she sat back up, there was a long moment while my brother and I sat staring, incapable of speech, when she did not even realize that her hair was on fire. Have you ever witnessed a 40-something-year-old woman's hair crackling like pine needles in a fire? A 40-something-year-old woman go running down the hall screaming? A 40-something-year-old woman who is okay, save the embarrassment? I have. My mother has spent so much time trying to prevent fires that I don't think she even realizes how many fires she's lit in her life. I'm not talking about her hair. But I am talking about the fire she's lit inside of me. The fire to always treat others with respect. The fire to be a good person. The fire to work my hardest to make this world a better place. You are my fire, Mom. The person who inspires the passion inside of me. The person who never allowed my fire to be put out, but instead encouraged it to spread. Thank you, Mom, for being so obsessed with fire. You better believe that I share this obsession every day of my life. Thank you.
Very nice. And
Thank
the
you.
snap, you know,
Thanks.
they do the snap at poetry
Yeah,
events also.
yeah.
Yes, very nice. I like that.
Thank
So
you.
after your mom had the experience, that's what inspired you to write this particular piece?
I have two younger brothers, and we'd always make fun of her about her sort of fear of fire all the time. And just, I thought about that word fire and really how much of an influence she's been in my life, and has always encouraged me, been my biggest cheerleader, been my #1 fan for everything I've done. So it's kind of using that word, in a different way.
What did she think about it?
She started crying when I first read it for her. I had it framed up nice. There's like a background my friend did for me, like candles that were burning. It's on that. She has it hanging up in our house.
Very nice. If we wanted to see some of your students' poetry, anybody can go to.
There's a Tri-Valley Central School YouTube page, and you'll find the latest poetry slam on there, as well as last year's and probably the year before too.
Okay, great. Well, Mr. Matt Haynes of Tri-Valley School, teacher, wonderful man who does this poetry slam. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you doing this.
Absolutely. I thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. My pleasure.